thankful for a lot of things. It's not stuff, until stuff gets taken from you, you look back and think, Lord, thank you for all the things you've done for me. Whether it's health or anything. We're in 2 Kings chapter 10. Set all this stuff up so I can just get to it quick. Stay. Good morning. It's good to see everybody. And as Brother Gary always used to say, Brother Gary Brayfield, it's good to be seen. We'll do prayer request afterwards, so we'll just get right into the lesson here. 2 Kings. It's interesting where we were, Ahab and Jezebel. Of course, Jezebel was labeled as the most evil woman in Scripture, in the Bible, that, and she just, previous chapter, she got her rewards, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But it's interesting of how, of course, Ahab was known to have, he believed in God, yet he was still, through his wife, pagan worship and all that stuff. And we're going to see his descendants and where they ended up. But I'm going to start reading in verse 1, chapter 10, 2 Kings. If I snuffle or cough, forgive me. Hopefully it won't blow the speakers out. And Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. And Jehu wrote letters and sent to Samaria unto the rulers of Jezreel, to the elders and to them that brought up Ahab's children, saying, Now as soon as this letter cometh to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, a fenced city also, and armor. Look even out at the best and meetest of your master's sons, and set him on your father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they were exceedingly afraid, and said, Behold, 2 kings stood not before him. Now how shall we stand? And it's interesting that here, King Joram, Ahab and Jezebel's son, and King Ahaziah, if I'm pronouncing it right, by my who's who in the Bible of Judah, it's interesting that, they had their day in court, if you want to put it that way, and here these people are saying, wow, they couldn't stand up against Jehu, so we need to open our ears here and listen. Verse 5, And he that was over the house, and he that was over the city, the elders also, and the bringers up of the children, sent to Jehu, saying, We are thy servants, and we will do all that thou shalt bid us. We will not make any king. Do thou which is good in thine eyes. Then he wrote a letter the second time to them, saying, If ye be mine, and ye will hearken unto my voice, take ye the heads of the men, your master's sons, and come to me at Jezreel by tomorrow this time. Now the king's sons, being 70 persons, were with great men of the city, which brought them up. And it came to pass, when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons, slew 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets, and sent them to Jezreel. And there came a messenger and told him, saying, They have brought the heads of the king's sons. That's kind of a, you think of, you get excited when FedEx or UPS comes to the door. This is kind of, here they come. And it came to pass in the morning that when he went out and stood and said to all the people, Ye be righteous, behold, I conspired against my master and slew him, but who slew all these? Now, I'm going to stop there right real quick. I think of, it's always in the Bible that if there's pagan worship or something that God doesn't approve of, I always picture the table with everything on it. Clear the table and you just take your hand and just take everything. It doesn't matter, men, women, children, cattle, everything just gets wiped out to put an end to that. And I think, being in the field and to be a farmer, Dad would always say, go out there and kill thistles. And thistles, you could have a whole field of thistles, and you get your little fork thing and, get them down by the roots. all you have to do is miss one thistle, and it's I don't know if you're familiar with thistles, but it could be, Brother Gary knows, about yay tall and spiny, stalk and leaves, but it's got a nice, beautiful flower on it. But the problem is, like dandelions, when they dry out, there's probably thousands of seeds on these little parachutes, whatever you want to call them. And I think if you can spend all day, all week, all month clearing that field, if you leave one behind, you're going to have, in a couple of years, I guess you could use cats or anything like that just get to work quick, and you're right back where you were. I think if even cancer, when it comes to cancer, you have to kill all the cancer cells. You can't leave one behind because they'll replicate, what have you, and then you're right back where you were. And I think that's the whole, idea of when, Jehu, it's interesting of all the stuff. Hopefully we'll have time to get to all of it, but of where his thought process was. Let's see. Go back to verse 10 here. Know that there shall fall unto the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spake concerning the house of Ahab. For the Lord hath done that which he spake by his servant Elijah. So Jehu slew all that remained in the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men, his kinfolks, his priests, until he left none remaining. And he arose, departed, and came to Samaria, and as he was in the shearing house in the way. Jehu met with the brethren at, Brother Jonathan, you got to help me with these names here. Uzziah, king of Judah, and said, Who are ye? And they answered, We are the brethren of Uzziah, and we go down to salute the children of the king and children of the queen. And I don't know, how word today, it used to be snail mail. Now it's email. You can send stuff across the world in just seconds. And, you wonder how much information gets transferred at this time. Jehu met with the brethren of Uzziah, king of Judah, and said, Who are ye? And they answered, We are the brethren of Uzziah. We go down to salute the children of the king and children of the queen. And he said, Take them alive. And they took them alive and slew them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men. Neither left he any of them. Excuse me. And when he was departed thence, he lighted on, Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. And there's a little interesting story within that of how that lineage ties into Jeremiah farther down. And there's some good. I'll just read that right now. It's interesting. It says, Jonadab or Jehonadab, two different pronunciations. When you look in the who's who, you're looking for the name and you're thinking, he's got to be mentioned. You can't find it, but there's a different name. I always think of Jack Kennedy or John Kennedy. Well, it's both. It says, Jehonadab was a man who, like Jehu, was zealous in following God. Jehonadab, however, demonstrated his zeal by separating himself and his family from the materialistic, idol-worshipping culture. He founded a group called the Rechabites, named after his father Rechab, who strove to keep their lives pure by living apart from society's pressures and temptations. And it talks about Jeremiah 35, gives us an example of his dedication to God. It says, because of their dedication, God promised they would always have descendants who would worship him. I think I guess that's a good example or a contrast of Ahab and maybe some today that where you dabble on both sides of the fence. You're either fully in or you're fully out. And I think here's someone that is totally dedicated to the Lord, so that's good. And it's always a roller coaster of faith in Israel's past, and I'm sure even United States we've seen that when churches used to be full, and then they're slowing down, and then 9/11 came, and towers came down, and everybody was back in church again, and everybody's faith was high, and then here we are with the whole coronavirus. I know there's things that in between, but where people are fearful or whatever, where, they're not where they should be. And I know that's, I guess, human nature, for the lack of a better term, of how things, the wax and wane of people's interest in anything in life. But definitely these chapters and throughout the Bible is that up and down of where Israel is really faithful, and then they go back to paganism and so on. Okay, I'm going to start in 15 again. And when he was departed thence, he lighted on Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. He saluted him and said to him, Is thine heart right, as my heart is with thy heart? And Jehonadab answered, It is. And when he says it is, knowing, getting a little background, you know that it really is. If it be, give me thine hand. And he gave him his hand, and he took him up to the chariot. And he said, Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. So they made him ride in his chariot. And when he came to Samaria, he slew all that remained unto Ahab in Samaria, till he destroyed him, according to the saying of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. And again, it's just taking his hand right across that table and just cleaning up any remnants that was connected to Ahab. Verse 19. Now therefore call unto me all the prophets of Baal. And this Brother Mike, this is an interesting part, and I know we kind of talked about it the last time, that of how, I don't want to use the word trickery, but maybe it is trickery, of where Jehu went with this. Verse 19. Now therefore call unto me all the prophets of Baal, and all his servants, and all his priests. Let none be wanting, for I have a great sacrifice to do to Baal. I could see, it's one of those things. He's got his megaphone out, and come on in. Here we're gonna really do this up good. Whosoever shall be wanting, he shall not live. But Jehu did it in subtlety, being subtle, to the intent that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. And Jehu said, Proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal, and they proclaimed it. Probably had the balloons out and the ribbons out and all kinds of stuff, just to get people wound up. Verse 21, And Jehu sent through all Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so there was not a man left that came not. And they came into the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was full from one end to the other. And he said unto him that was over the vestry, Bring forth vestments for all the worshipers of Baal. And he brought them forth vestments. And Jehu went, and Jehonadab the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal, and said unto the worshipers of Baal, Search and look that there were here. I get kind of tickled here. Search and look that there be here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but the worshipers of Baal only. This is trickery at its best. Just to know that he's got these people together, and nobody's going to, worshipers of the Lord to be involved in this. Verse 24, And when they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings, Jehu appointed 80 men without, and said, If any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escape, he that letteth him go, his life shall be for the life of him. He was serious about this. He was wanting to, didn't want anybody to escape. No, he wants to concentrate these Baal worshipers in here to where he takes care of this. Verse 25, And it came to pass, excuse me, and it came to pass as soon as he had made an offering of the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the captains, Go in and slay them, let none of them come forth. And they smote them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the captains cast them out, and went into the city of the house of Baal. And they brought forth the images out of the house of Baal and burned them. And they brake down the images of Baal, and brake down the image of Baal, and made it a draft house unto this day. Stop there real quick. It's interesting because I always think, I can't remember when it was, maybe the mid-'80s, where, you have all these people with warrants for their arrest, and you can't seek them out. It's too hard to. It always seems like the police are always one step behind. These guys. So it was one of those things that, hey, I just got something in the mail. I just want a big screen TV. I got to go pick it up. So they give them this address. When the guys come in, they say, "You're under arrest." It was interesting because they brought, them, the cops brought the warrant escapees, whatever you want to call them, to them. Didn't have to search them out. And I think here, we always say, Brother Mike, that things haven't changed. People haven't changed from whenever time BC this was of when of how to, I don't want to say motivate people, but to get people to do things. And I always thought that was interesting. Verse 27, and they break down the image of Baal and break down the house of Baal and made it a draft house to this day. I always think of when Saddam Hussein fell. I mean, every poster, everything that had to do with them, they destroyed. And the draft house is interesting. I don't know which one I've got here. Maybe it's this one. What is a draft house? I looked up that, and it's interesting that I guess the ultimate insult of this house of Baal became basically a public toilet. A latrine I've seen in some things, public toilet. Here, this is what I think you Baal or you Baal worshipers. I know that, they've all one of those things that just makes a subtle point in its own way, I guess. Verse 29 says, "Howbeit from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not after them, to wit, the golden calves that were in Bethel and were in Dan." Here, Jehu talks about too that Jehu was, I guess, out to get Baal and do the Lord's work in a way. But it says here, "Why did Jehu destroy the idols of Baal, but not the golden calves in Dan and Bethel?" It says Jehu's motives may have been more political than spiritual. He said if Jehu destroyed the golden calves, his people would have traveled to the temple in Jerusalem and rival southern kingdom and worship there. And it's interesting of how, and again, it's always people's motives. You always look after the fact of, how you interpret, I guess. But it's interesting that, there's always things in play. I think of even politics today of how the spin has put on stuff. And it doesn't matter if it's local politics. I know the city of Seymour was similar in its way of how they would put spin on things. But it says, number 2, Baal worship was associated with the dynasty of Ahab, so it's politically advantageous to destroy Baal. And again, it's one of those things, good morning, one of those things that there's more going on than meets the eye. It says the golden calves, on the other hand, had a longer history in the northern kingdom and were valued by all political factions. Number 3 says Baal worship was anti-God, but the golden calves were thought to be a visible representation of God himself, even though God's law stated clearly that such worship was idolatrous. It's interesting, it says here, there's always a little snippet on the end of these things. It says, like Jehu, it's easy for us to denounce the sins of others while excusing sin in our own lives. That's what Pastor Adrian Rogers talked about, justification and rationalization. You can always say, well, I stole a couple pencils from work, but I didn't cheat on my wife. We always talk about a sin as a sin, and I think, it's one of those deals that it's just however you want to, look at it and justify your own sin. Verse 30, and we're in 2 Kings 10, brother and sister. "And the Lord said unto Jehu, because thou hast done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, and hast done unto the house of Ahab according to all that was in thine heart, thy children of the 4th generation shall sit in the throne of Israel." It says, but Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord, God of Israel, with all his heart, for he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which had made Israel to sin. I can't remember. It says in the with the word here, it says, after displaying all that zeal, Jehu should have set the example to his devotion of Jehovah, but he did not. A nation does not become righteous by simply removing evil. It must also establish godliness. An empty house is an invitation to even worse tenants. And that's, people always talk about, I've done this and I've done that, but if you're not full in, there's always that open door for sin. Anybody have any thoughts or comments? There's lots of stuff. If I get my cough drop out from under my cheek here. Verse 32 says, in those days the Lord began to cut Israel short, and Hazael smote all on the coast of Israel, from Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites and the Reubenites, the Massites, and Or, which is the river of Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did, and all his might, are they not written in the book of Chronicles and the kings of Israel? And Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Jehoahaz, his son, reigned in his stead. At the time that Jehu reigned over Israel and Samaria was 20 and 8 years. And it's interesting, too, that there's always varying lengths of kings, whether they're, short lengths, and maybe, some start out young as kings, some last many years as kings, some start out, mid-age, and others kind of start out real young. And I can't remember, there was a 7-year-old, I don't know if that, I read too far ahead and I can't remember what I've read, but 7 years old when he became king. I want to read something else here. I'll read a little bit here too of, references verse 10:24, which is says, and when they went in, verse 24, when they went in to offer sacrifice and burnt offerings, Jehu appointed 80 men without, and said, if any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escape, he that letteth them go, his life shall be the life for him. It says, Israel was supposed to be intolerant of any religion that did not worship the true God. The religions of surrounding nations were evil and corrupt. They were designed to destroy life, not to uphold it. And I think, I always throw I think out there because everybody has their own opinion, but it's one of those things you always talk about. There was always coworkers that talk about the weekend they had, of drinking or the fun they've had or the fights they got into, and I think none of that really, and that's a good sentence there. They were designed to destroy life, not to uphold it. And I think of all sins, we know the wages of sin is death. We know that's a powerful sentence. But all the things that people justify of what they do, and we've all done. I mean, I've done it. I'm not going to lie. And I probably still sin and I don't realize it when, whether you have some, not a positive statement about somebody or when you're aggravated or some other thing. But I think that, there's always that part of life that definitely isn't a positive thing. I know misery loves company. When you get around people that are so unhappy, they like to bring you down. So they don't like perky people. Of course, that was one of those things that when you're happy and other people are unhappy, they want to put you in the same situation because it's unfair that you're happy or whatever. And we make our own happiness however we can look at stuff, and you can look at stuff different ways to where you can either look at things positive or negative. I remember one that'll always pop in my mind. I remember Mitchell Plummer that I used to work with had sharpened my knife, and he was one of those guys that, the sharper the knife, the better, and, you always get the knife out. The cool guys always, take the hair off your arm. Check that out. And most of the time, my pocket knife's either a gasket scraper or a wire stripper, so it's pretty dull. And I remember I was stripping the wire, and I just barely, just like a razor blade, just barely cut my finger, and it instantly made me mad, but then I thought, thank you, Lord, I didn't cut my finger off, because as sharp as that was, it could have done some major damage. I did that with a fan once, and hopefully I learned my lesson. But there was one of those things, you can always look at things two different ways, and I think of how, whether it's sin, or the negative things in life, there's, we heard on one of the preaching things we were listening to on this morning is the last things you always hear of a redneck is watch this, it's always one of those things that you think, yeah, that's good, and sin lasts, the pleasure of sin lasts for a short time, where, if you can get your heart right and live in a positive way and be in a positive influence of other people, I think that's definitely a long range goal for all of us. I want to read here too. They were designed to destroy life, not to uphold it. Israel's God's special nation, chosen to be an example of what was right. And I think where, United States, started out, and they say with Christian people, and I know some of our forefathers were necessarily Christians or worshiped God or what, but they had values in mind, and I think of how that's kind of degraded, I guess, and of course Hollywood, not to be negative, but negative, and it's all of its negative influence of sin and stuff, and I think of how we're we uphold that stuff, but I think the original intention for a Christian nation of how God blessed this nation and it prospered, and the beginning of the last century, we can say that now, it sounds like we're really old, but last century where innovation came in and mass production and of how it bettered our lives, and I think of where we're headed, of how the third world nations that were so maybe envious of the United States back when, because we had such a good nation and God blessed this nation. And I think we need to get back, it's that revival of the country that we need to open our eyes. And people always, it's oh, you're a Christian, or you're a religious fanatic. Or remember Brother Derek had on the back of his Magnum there I can't remember what it was all of a sudden, but I don't know, I can't remember, but something about a crazy Christian or something, or something like that. But to be that concentrated on the Lord and to do good, and I know it's not just to do good. There's so much more to that, but I think of just the negativity and where I don't want to say be judgmental, I guess, but Christians have been tolerant for so long that I think it's partly our responsibility. This country is in the shape it's in. But the nations that hate America or have been jealous of America are soon going to be in a position where they can put their rule over us, and we need to keep on keeping on and to spread the word and be the salt and light for our coworkers. Or family, and it's one of those things that, my brother, what he's going through, and he has his days where he's softer, and I tell him I love him because we never really grew up in that, I guess that era of telling your parents you love them or they tell it back to you. Tell him I love him, and he'll say I love you too, and then you'll have those days where he's feeling better, where that just kind of goes out the window because he doesn't need that softness, and that's where generally people get in those holes or what, when you cry out to God to help me. And I think that's an example of how the country is too. That and again, 9/11 was a good example of that, where Lord help us, help us get through this, and after everything's back again, and the planes or extra security and this and that. And it's like, well, we kind of forget about God again. And there's always those commentaries of how, and Paul Harvey did a good one of I can't remember. Tina, you remember how that Paul Harvey thing where he talked about if devil, and that was back in the 60s, I think. What? Yeah, okay, yeah. And I think of how, you think about that, and that was in the 60s or somewhere in there, and you think, how true is that today of some 60 odd years later? And I think it's amazing to me that, we need to get back, and again, the United States is no different from Israel, of those up and down roller coaster where we're getting close to God or we're getting far away from God. Read here. But Israel's kings, priests, and elders first tolerated, and that's where we're at, and then incorporated surrounding pagan beliefs, and thus became apathetic to God's way. And I think it's so true. It's so true for us today. Excuse me. It says we are completely intolerant of sin and remove it from our lives. We are to be completely intolerant of sin and remove it from our lives. It is one thing to be tolerant of people who hold different views, but we should not condone beliefs or practices that lead people away from God's standard of living. And we think of, when you get your new leaf blower or your new car or your new refrigerator, you always get a manual with it that tells you all about it, how to clean it, how to take care of it. And we've got, our manual right here to guide us and to learn from it and to share, it with other people or and to apply it to our lives. Brother Mike, you always say about listening to Brother Randy preach, to not just to listen to it, but to apply it to our lives, because it's our responsibility. It's a big responsibility to share that with everyone, because if people aren't aware of it, they've got, I guess you could say they're innocent of their lack of knowledge. It's our responsibility to share that, and it's just it's one of those deals that sometimes it's hard to talk to people, but there's certainly, Lord gives you opportunities to witness, I guess. Does anybody have anything to add or subtract or comments, suggestions, anything?